complicated, you know, man. It's like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side, and like,
All right, Woodlander, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been something I've been looking forward to for the last couple of months, and glad to finally be here.
This one's been in the pipe for a while, and I'm glad to get it done. I think, like a lot of people, I found you, through Semiagog, friend of the channel, and it was really a surprise because you have a big channel, but it's so easy on social media to just get siloed, where you almost never see people outside of your little bubble. And so, seeing your stuff, and it was really, really interesting. I was, kind of a breath of fresh air. But before we get into that, for the people who maybe aren't familiar with you, could you kind of, describe who you are and what you do?
Yeah. I suppose most people in the UK are going to know me as being the oddball out of the dissident right, because I live off grid. So I bought a couple of acres of woodland. I built a cabin for myself and my family, and it's completely off grid. So there's solar panels for the electricity, rainwater collection for the water system. I'm not connected to the gas mains. We keep small livestock, so we got a lot of poultry, chickens, turkeys, ducks, quail, and a whole load of pets. We got 7 dogs and 7 cats running around the place. So it's not a normal lifestyle. It's not a house in a street, which is what most people are used to. So my angle was always going to be slightly different from the majority. And I think that's where I've kind of picked up a small following. And over the last couple of years, I've helped other people do the same as me, those that want to. And I've kind of pushed an agenda which is to say, look, the system is designed to crush you. And at the moment, we have no power. So you can't fight that system. You can scream and shout and holler, but you can't really fight it. What you can do is disengage from it as much as possible. Don't give it your energy. Turn away from it and become as self-sufficient as you can. That's going to open up opportunities for you. It's going to allow you more time, probably give you more money. And it's another way of fighting back. It's going to put you in a much better position to push back against that system. So really, that's kind of the angle I'm coming from the dissident right at.
So you mentioned that you view the system essentially as, malevolent. It wants to crush you. And, we, our friends, whoever those people are, have very little power. So it makes more sense to disengage. So where did you come to that conclusion? Was that something that just kind of dropped out of the blue, or did that come from experience?
It was a long process. So I was politically involved at a very early age, from the age of 12, 13 years old. And that was with much smaller, far-right political parties. I won't go into massive details, but that was through things that had happened in my personal life and running into gangs of coloured youths. I was looking for answers. They weren't forthcoming from mainstream politics. So got involved with smaller political parties that seemed to be offering some sort of sensible way forward, and spent decades within those smaller groups, eventually coming to the conclusion that actually there was no way they were going to be allowed near the reins of power. Every step forward that they took, they ended up taking 2 back. And it just looked like an impossible task. So as much as I believed in what they were fighting for, it didn't seem possible that they were ever going to achieve power, which is the end goal. So I was quite disenfranchised and kind of dropped out of politics for a while. My beliefs didn't change, but my attitude towards a political answer did. I kind of went off grid at that point because I'd already done my research. I already knew what the problems were and where they were coming from. So I kind of became grey. And what I mean by that is I closed down my bank accounts. I couldn't have anything else to do with the banking system. I knew it was corrupt. I knew it was completely evil. I only used cash. I became self-employed because I didn't want to give my time to a corporate entity that funded the system. I was then in more control of how much I earned and when I worked. I became political again in the late 90s in a slightly different way. And that in this country, that was when New Labour under Tony Blair came to power. And we spoke briefly about this just before we went live. I'd been following Blair for a number of years, and it was fairly obvious to me what he was going to do. His main aim was to literally open the borders for this country. If possible, he wanted to disband the union. He was seriously on about, Scotland breaking away, Wales breaking away. And to a certain extent, he did that. He introduced parliaments in Scotland and parliaments in Wales. So trying to break the country up and at the same time literally flood it full of people from the third world. There was no way these smaller political parties had any hope of getting him out of power. The only other avenue was the Conservative Party, who had just been trounced. But that actually led me to believe that there could possibly be a way to move the Conservative Party further to the right. So I joined the Conservative Party to see if that would be possible. And at grassroots level, it probably is possible. Most of the grassroots members are just as right-wing as me, hold many of the same beliefs, although they may not speak them publicly. The problem arises as you get further up that political structure within mainstream politics. And I was dealing with MPs and the civil servants at the time. There was nothing between the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and the Liberal Party. All of these politicians weren't really interested in the public or the nation. They were one group of people whose main aim was to remain in power. And it didn't really matter which party it was. They were a group of people that helped each other. They were good friends, all of them. The Labour politicians, the Conservative politicians, the Liberal politicians, they had meals out together, they drank in the bar together, they went on holiday together. And their main aim was to not rock the boat, to keep the system as it was, and for them to consolidate as much power at the top as it was possible to do. And we still see it. You see it every day now. So politicians will switch from being a politician to a director of a large company, and the other director is an old Labour MP. And this was what was going on. And again, it left me disheartened that I was now in a position where there was no political answer from the small political groups, and there was no political answer from the mainstream right-wing party. So I decided that if it was unable for me to change the system, then I could at least limit the amount of time, effort that I gave to it. So I really was looking at disengaging from the system and becoming as self-sufficient as I possibly could, which led me to where I am now. So that's the long story short.
because and this is why I always enjoy, because I'm a younger guy, right? And I always enjoy talking to people who've been on this side of things for longer than I have, because in many ways you came to a conclusion that many of us are just kind of coming to now, right? So both of us were on Millennial this year, and
Yeah.
when I spoke to Millennial Woes, he basically said, like, look, I want to talk to you about, like, well, what are the themes of the year? And to me, at least, one of the major themes of 2022 is basically populism lost, and it lost everywhere.
Yeah.
And I mean, you guys got this bad with Boris, right? You know, this big conservative wave. Oh, he's this far right, in scare quotes, candidate. And what happened? Nothing changed.
No, nothing changes.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, I was
thing.
used to this, and I could see this happening when Trump was elected, and exactly the same thing with Brexit as well. And I tried to tell people at the time, which is, it doesn't really matter, right? It really doesn't matter if you win this or if you lose this. I can tell you now, we haven't got power. They have. Nothing is going to change. And it's a horrible realization to come to. And I kind of came to it twice. But it's absolutely true. I mean, Brexit was such a big deal for so many people. And if you look at where we are now, we're probably in a worse situation after we won the vote.
Right. Yes. And to me, at least, my point in this is not saying, like, oh, you know, we were stupid for falling for the bait. Because I think for a lot of people, you know, when you see something you don't like, well, what do you learn in school? All right. Well, I don't like this, so I should vote. You know, we should throw the bums out.
Yeah.
You know, use a phrase from American politics. And to me, it's like, okay, I'll give you one shot. You know, you tried. But after it doesn't work, and it not only doesn't work, but I mean, we've all seen what's happened in essentially to every populist government, you know, across the entire, you know, civilized world. At this point, it's like, well, okay, that's not an option anymore. That's just not going to work. Trying it again, you know, you're dumb for trying it again. You know, you've seen what they'll do. And so the reason I found your work so interesting is that attitude of, like, all right, well, what can I control? I can control how I live my life.
That was it, exactly.
So my audience in general is a little bit younger. It's mostly younger guys.
Yeah.
And so there's some advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is we've basically got our whole lives ahead of us. You know, we can really make changes. We can, you know, set up for kind of a different style of life. But, you know, there are a lot of us who are kind of directionless. So if someone, I guess, like, looks at what you've done and says, like, I want to do that, like, how can they start? Like, are there skills they need to cultivate? Are there, you know, like a certain lifestyle you should have beforehand? Like, what's a good way to get started on becoming disconnected from the system?
The only thing you really need to do is make that mental decision. And it's a really difficult one to do, because we are so used to being comfortable in the West that to actually think outside of the box and understand that sometimes there's going to be discomfort in the early stages is a difficult mindset for a lot of people to get into. But if you actually look what I did, I bought 2.5 acres, which is relatively small, but it's actually more than I need. So I can grow food here. I can keep livestock here. I haven't got cows or anything like that, but I don't need them. And I can be much more self-sufficient. 2 acres when I bought it in 2014, 2015 was £16,000. So, you know, it's massively achievable. I had zero construction industry knowledge or building knowledge. I didn't know how to build anything, but I'm quite capable of watching a YouTube video. And so when I wanted to build the cabin, I sort of looked on YouTube and said, you know, how to build a cabin, and a couple of videos came up and they were really complicated. So I thought, well, I'm just going to strip this down to basics. And I actually watched a video on how to build a large shed out of timber. And that was easy. So I figured, well, if I just scale up what this chap's doing, so instead of using 2B1s, I used 3B4s, and I just scaled everything up. And I had a few mates that were builders, and I sort of showed them my rough drawings on the back of an envelope and said, if I was to do this and this, is it likely to fall down? And they gave me a few pointers and said, well, put a brace across here. And so I did. And within a relatively short period of time, I had a building. But the main thing to do was to make the decision. And that, for me, was a logical next step. When you understand that the system is designed to crush you, to keep you down, and to lie to you from the beginning that you're going to have to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and drive half an hour or an hour to somewhere you don't really want to be, work for 8, 9, maybe 10 hours, get back in your car, drive home after earning just enough to pay the bills and maybe put food on the table. And you're going to have to do that nowadays, basically, until you die. And your reward for that is maybe 2 weeks in a sunny location where you don't have to work for those 2 weeks. I couldn't understand how people had been sold that and were doing that and believed that that was life. That is worse than slavery. At least a slave knows they're a slave. This whole thing that we've been sold is not what we're here to do, and not how we're supposed to live. So I wanted to take back control, and the only way of taking back control, if I couldn't change the system, was to get out of it, walk away from it, and build something better for myself and my family. And that's what I did.
I think one of the things that I kind of realized over the pandemic, because there's this kind of cope, that you can take, which is, oh, the people in charge are just idiots. They don't understand it. And I think, like a lot of people, I kind of had this realization that they're not stupid. I mean, there are stupid people in government, don't get me wrong. But there is a certain percentage of them that seem to be evil. Like they actually want bad things to happen to you. And to me, right, the ability to take away at least some of their ability to inflict pain on me. Because look, I think we're far enough away from the pandemic, right, that we can speak about this frankly without, getting censored. But to me, I remember I was working on a roof with a friend. And this was right at the time at which, Joe Biden had, put forward some legislation that basically said any employer over 100 employees is required to have all of their their employees take the vax, right? Or else we'll fine them, they'll be kicked out. And that realization that, wait a minute, you're going to the system, right? Because it's basically the same thing in the US, right? It's a small group of people. It's a
exactly
uniparty.
You've got a two-party system, and I can tell you what, your people will know this through, doesn't matter how young you are. It doesn't really matter which party gets in. Your life's going to be exactly the same in the following week. You're going to have to pay more tax. You're going to have to work harder. Right, things are going to be more difficult, and more Mexicans are going to be coming across the border. It's not going to change.
And that realization that this isn't just kind of like passive. Like they don't not care about you. They don't just leave you on that whatever. We don't care. They're just not our concern. They're actively going to come for you. They're going to make your life a living hell if you're not integrated into the system. And so, like, even in little things, the ability to not have to, like what I always think about is you get a lot of freedom by not depending on the system, even if you still integrate, right? So you have a regular job, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm self-employed, which is one of the main things that really, I was so angry. For weeks on end, my wife was like, "You're going to have to calm down before you burst a blood vessel." I was so angry that the government, the state, had actually said to me, You can't open your business, and if you do, we will fine you and possibly imprison you.
Right. Yeah.
I
Your
was,
own business.
yeah, and I was so angry that they actually had the audacity to say that. Excuse the dogs if you can hear them barking in the background.
No worries. But sorry, my point was that when you have that freedom, you don't have to be so subservient. You know, when you don't have, you know, debts hanging over your head, when you don't have a mortgage that you have to pay, you know, you have that ability to say no. You know,
Yeah,
because really, like, even though you technically have the freedom to leave your job at any point, well, if you've got a car payment and a house payment, you know, insurance payments and all that, to the point where it's like, if you lose your job even for a month, you know, you're out on the street, like, are you really free at that point? And again, look, I
yeah.
realize, like, some of it's
No,
inevitable. You know, you may
yeah, but
have
I
to.
mean, you've kind of hit the nail on the head, which is when you start looking at all these things, you understand that you're not really free. And that's what I was after. I was after freedom. And you can't have that if you've got a mortgage to pay, because you're beholden to the bank and you have to work to get the money to pay the mortgage, or they'll take your house away. And it's the same with rent. It's exactly the same story. I've got no rent to pay here and I've got no mortgage. And I didn't have a whole load of money when I did this. What I did is I built this place week by week. So whatever money I had at the end of the week, and we didn't go on holidays, we didn't eat out, we didn't go to the cinema, we stopped everything. All of our money went into this. So at the end of the week, if I had £200, we went down, we bought £200 worth of timber. And the following week, we did the same thing until eventually we had a home. But now we owe no one any money. No one can take it away from us. It's ours. That frees up a lot of time and a lot of money and gives me 100 more options.
Well, it almost plays into, you know, a different definition of freedom, right? Because there's one definition of freedom, which is, you know, I have no responsibilities, you know, in a way that's like, oh, I can do, you know, I can eat as much as I want, I can drink as much as I want, I can, and there's a certain perspective which that is freedom, right? But in doing that, you're kind of picking a different set of chains, right? So
Yeah.
in your sense, like, you're right, you don't have any payment, you know, you don't have any, you know, any of these kind of, like, you know, essentially like kingmakers deciding, you know, what you can and can't do. But, like, that isn't a free choice. You know, you're giving up a lot of convenience. You know, I
Yeah.
assume, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know your situation, but, like, if something breaks in your house, you're
I've
fixing
got to
it.
fix it. Yeah. And this is some of the things I've tried to tell people, which is I can tell you that the place I built is 2,000 square foot, which is actually bigger than the average 5-bed house in this country. So 2,000 square foot. It's 4 bedrooms. I've got a 25-foot lounge, a kitchen, dining room, a utility room, and I've got a wife, and that's why I've got all these things. Right, but I would have been happy with one room. So I've got not a dishwasher. I've got a washing machine, a tumble dryer, a microwave. I've got a big American-style fridge freezer, because that keeps her happy. And it's not a shack in the woods. I built a home, and somewhere my kids can come and feel comfortable. And but things go wrong as well. You know, they went wrong during the build, and even now. I mean, we've had 2 weeks where it's been sub-zero, so it hasn't got above freezing in the evenings for 2 weeks, and my water system froze. Doesn't matter what I've done over the last 4 years. If I have prolonged periods of -4 to -6, then some part of it will freeze, and that means I've got no running water. Now, it's not a massive issue. People I speak to are like, "Oh my God, how are you coping?" I'm like, "Well, we know this can happen, so we've got a store of fresh water, and we can boil a kettle and have a wash, and it's not a major thing. It'll be fixed in maybe 2 or 3 days. So things go wrong, and there are hardships, but the payoff is phenomenal. So yes, I've got to get up on my roof and scrape leaves off the solar panels in autumn. And yes, the water system can freeze in the winter, and I have to fix things. But the payoff is so much better. I don't have to go to work for 40 hours a week. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I probably only need to do 5 or 6 hours a week financially to survive.
Well, and again, I've been thinking a lot about this, right? Because, and I don't mean to take this in, an explicitly religious direction, but to me, I grew up right in the 2010s, which at least in the US, it was kind of like the high water mark of new atheism, which was this idea that like, if we separate ourselves from religion, we'll create this like new, hyper rationalistic society. And again, not to make any specific religious claims, but the idea that you can, the idea is a false dichotomy, that you either worship or you don't. Much like this, the idea that you either are free or you work is fake.
Yeah.
There are just certain things, and it's like Bob Dylan even has this. So it's like you've got to serve someone. And his whole point is like everyone has a master. And so the advantage is like you can pick that master. And I'll be honest, I'm much more comfortable, given the choice, right, with my master being, a set of solar panels that you have to rake off every autumn.
Yeah, I mean the wood chopping one is the one most people understand. So I mean, most people can walk into their home, turn on a switch, and they've got instant heat. I've had to chop down a tree and then chop that tree into logs, and then split those logs into smaller logs, and then stack those logs so that they can be aired and seasoned. And I've got to wait a year at least, and then I can burn those logs in my log burner, which will provide me with heat. So delayed gratification is something you have to learn and come to terms with living the way I do, which is you do something and it might be a year's time before you see the fruit of that. But once you get on top of it, once you realize that it's to do with you put in some hard work, you put in some effort, and then you can see the fruits of your labor, is a very rewarding thing.
That's interesting. So there's a idea, and I don't know how true it is, on this side of the pond, that in the UK, you guys essentially live in a nanny state, right? A million permits, a council commission you need to, ask before you can do anything. How did you just practically manage to build your own home?
They've tried really hard to. There's a lot of regulations, but regulations aren't laws. They can become legal. So, for instance, you can't, or they say you can't buy a piece of land and build a house on it, because that would be breaking planning regulations. Well, actually, that's not illegal. You can build a home on your own land. If the council come and tell you to stop, you've then got to stop, because then it becomes a legal thing. They will serve a notice. Then it becomes legal. But until that point, you are only in breach of planning regulations. Also, in England, we've got a lot of old common law, which is still on the books. And one piece of that is known as the 4-year rule. And it's a rule that says that if you build a home and you live in it for 4 years and nobody's told you to stop or to take it down or anything else, it is then lawful and outside of enforcement, which was a lot of the reason I chose to do it in the middle of a wood, because if I can't see out from where I'm building it, it was completely unlikely that anybody could see in. And if no one can see what I'm doing, then no one can complain about it. And that is exactly what happened. So I built it and I lived in it for 4 years, and it then becomes lawful. And they can't do anything about it.
That's interesting. I've kind of found similar things. We have much more, especially depending on what state you're in, much more lax, rules about building and zoning. But there is this kind of attitude of asking forgiveness, not permission. Where it's like, well, if it doesn't become a problem,
yeah,
it just becomes too much work.
That's pretty much. I mean, the advice I was given was do it. If you get found out, you can then there's things you can do. Then you could apply for planning, you can fight them, you can put forward a case of why you have to be there. But it's not illegal to do what you've done, so it's not a crime. They may say you shouldn't have done that, it's in a breach of planning, but then you can kind of argue your case. So it's definitely a case of asking for forgiveness instead of permission. But I mean, I understand that in a lot of states in America, I talked to a few Americans who are doing similar things, and it seems to be becoming more and more popular. I know Charlemagne's doing it with a group of friends. Semiagog, although not off grid, has just bought a homestead. It's definitely becoming more popular in the UK, and I think a lot of young men are realizing, when they're looking at house prices, they're thinking, wow, if I could buy a piece of land and build my own, and maybe get a few of my friends to, give me a hand to build it, I could be mortgage free in a relatively short period of time. And then I'm going to have a lot more money to put into other areas. Maybe I can change instead of working at this shitty dead end job, I can, do what I want to do. I can start my own business, or because I won't have a mortgage to pay.
Right. And again, this is intuitive, right? And if you asked someone, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's obvious, but people don't necessarily live it. That when you're faced in a situation where you're like, well, I don't have any money, there are kind of two ways to get out of that. You can either, work harder, earn more, which, don't get me wrong, that's a path you can take if you want. Or you can just radically reduce your expenses. And especially if you're young, if you never build bad habits, of spending up to your limit, of, always living on the margin, then like really, as long as you're a single guy with no, responsibilities, no kids, it's pretty hard to like fall out of the bottom of society. You don't need to be a slave. No.
And the great thing is, if you take away your big costs, so let's say a mortgage, if you haven't got a mortgage to pay, or that massive rent to pay, and you start growing a little bit of food, so suddenly you've got your vegetables, and you have a word with someone, how do you do this pickling thing? So now you've got pickles to go through the winter as well. So suddenly you're not spending as much money on food, and now you've got a few chickens, so you've got eggs every day. So now you're thinking, well, I can actually feed myself, and I've got shelter. And the beauty of it is, if you were to start small, we built a cabin, a 2-bedroom cabin during the lockdown for £5,000. £5,000 to build a 2-bedroom home. But that's what you can do. And there'll be people listening, there'll be young men listening thinking, do you know what? I've got £5,000. I was going to buy a car, but I could build a home. And then I wouldn't have to pay rent. And hopefully some people listening to this would think, maybe I should start looking at a bit of land. And I understand that for some people that's outside of their scope of possibilities. I get a lot of people saying to me, I'd love to buy land, but there's just no way I could afford it. It's like £10,000, £20,000. I just can't get that sort of money. I could probably get 5, but there's nothing around for that. Well, get 4 or 5 people together, 4 or 5 of you together, and buy a piece. Now you've got a piece of land between you. And okay, it's not just going to be you there. There's going to be 3 or 4 other people. Build some homes.
I think you see another advantage in the States because it's fairly easy to homeschool your kids in the US. And I actually went to one of these, I went to, normal schools, through high school, through middle and high school. But as an elementary school kid, they, a lot of places will have what they call co-ops, which essentially works off that same model where basically everyone pools their resources and they're like, what? I'll be honest, maybe this person doesn't really know how to teach math, but they can teach science. And so you can essentially make your own schoolhouse, in the same model of how school was taught, at least in the States, up until, essentially the 1950s. And so, again, there is this kind of problem, right? Which is that all of us on, the dissident right agree on one thing and one thing only, which is that we hate the system. Everyone has their own different harebrained scheme for what they would do if they were in charge. And, fair enough. But you're kind of limited in what you can actually do. The likelihood of any one of us being the guy in charge, I'll be honest, is pretty low. And so, looking at what you can control, there are things like that where, building a community, finding people who maybe aren't 100% like-minded, but are close enough that they're better than being kind of like indexed to this system that wants to crush you.
Yeah, so without a doubt. And the thing is, there's lots of people out there who will agree with you that this system, for whatever reason, is not good. And if you can get 4 or 5 of you together, you can get some money. And if you can all got a bit of money, you can buy some land. Now, this is yours. You own it. Now, at the moment, they haven't taken away property rights. So your ownership of that land is really important. It's something they can't take away from you. And I was always aware that even when I had a mortgage on houses, this can be taken away from me. This can be taken away. If I'm renting a property, the landlord could just tell me, I'm selling the house, you've got to move. If I've got a mortgage, the interest rates go up too much, I'm not going to be able to afford it. The bank will take the house off me. All of these things which people say, look at my house. It's not your house. It belongs to the landlord or it belongs to the bank until you finish those payments after 30 or 40 years. So for me, I did what I did far too late in life. I didn't start this until, I was nearly 50. If there's blokes listening to this in their 20s, you can be mortgage free in 4 or 5 years. And that's going to open up so many more possibilities for you. If you want to fight against this system, imagine being able to do it when you've got money behind you. That all the money you earn is yours now. You don't have to pay a mortgage. You've got no rent to pay. You've got your own property that you own outright. Now you're a powerful individual.
Well, right. And that's also how, when you think about it, right, which is that one of the main complaints I see from younger guys is that a lot of them feel like, the generations that came before them dropped the ball. They didn't pass on the skills that they feel like they should have been. And fair enough, right? That's in many cases, that's true. But again, there's that decision to be made of like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, don't get me wrong. There's some kind of utility in complaining. You can figure out what the problem is. But once you've done it, you're like, okay, this is a problem. What's your next step? And it's like, all right, well, if you want to stop it, if you plan on having kids, then build up resources and build up skills that you can pass on. And I've found, right, that especially
pass them on.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to practical skills, you really learn a lot by just doing it. And really, especially in the age of YouTube, you can kind of just bumble your way through a lot of things, between a combination of YouTube and meeting people.
I wasn't joking. When I built this place, I did have a couple of mates come over, help me put the roof on. Mainly, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have any idea what I was doing on any of it. I've got to be honest. But here it is. You know what I mean? Sort of 6.5, 7 years later, it's still here. But I did all the plumbing. I didn't have a clue. I'd never plumbed anything. Again, I watched a video and I kind of thought about it in common sense terms and just kind of did it. And the same with the wiring. I got an electrician in and I said, right, tell me what wire I need to run for the lights and what I need to do. And he sort of said, well, you need to do this with this wire, and wrote it down. And for the sockets, you need this one, and it needs to go round the bottoms. And I said, right, if I do all that, will you come back at the end and fit the fuse box and test it all for me? Make sure it's not going to burn down. He said, yeah. So I did all the donkey work. Took me 3 months to wire the whole place up. He came back at the end, fitted the consumer unit, tested all the wiring, said, right, that's absolutely fine. And I had to pay a day for an electrician instead of having to pay 3 weeks for an electrician. So I mean, you do this stuff, and I learned a skill. I learned plumbing. I learned some sort of electrical work. You know, all these different things that I had to learn in order to get this place up and running. And I can now talk to other people when they're saying, well, what do you do about, water? And I can show them. I can show them how I built the system. And yeah, it's not rocket science. It's all possible.
I think especially for younger guys, there's a lot of younger guys lack confidence. And to be honest, they lack confidence for good reason. They haven't really done anything. They don't know how to do anything. But building those kind of like practical skills, and I say this as someone who's kind of a jack of all trades, novice, essentially, where it's like, I've done a lot of things amateurishly. But once you gain that skill, they're like, oh no, I actually do know how to fix a pipe, or I know how to fix, with just something stupid, like when the pump goes bad at the house.
Yeah.
Like, those are little things that do give you competence and make you a useful person. And if you're trying to build a community, if you're trying to gather people together, those are the kind of things that make people want to gather around you. When you're a genuinely like useful person that can be trusted. And again, like,
the one thing I found when you get a group of people together, right, is everybody is good at something. Everyone's got a skill, and it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, everyone is good at something, and they will come to the fore when you need them. Someone will be really good at woodworking. Someone will be better with metal. Someone will just be really good at coming up with ideas, and it'll be other people that are good at putting those ideas together. And I understand that young people lack confidence, but I would say, look, the best thing to do is just do it. Do it. And if you fail, right, do it again. If you build something and it's not working, start again. Get some more ideas. Go and get some information, and keep going. I was pretty much of the mindset that as long as I had the raw materials and I started, I did get advice. Like I said, I spoke to some mates who were in the construction industry and showed them a literally was a biro drawing on an envelope. And they were saying, yeah, that's absolutely fine. You want to put a brace in here and maybe one in that corner. But apart from that, that'll work. So, you kind of go with what you've got. And I did make a lot of mistakes, and you don't figure those out until after you've done it. And you think, I've just spent 3 months doing this one thing. And then you come up with an idea yourself where you could have done it in half the time. But it doesn't really matter. You've done it anyway.
Yeah, again, and I don't mean to keep harking on this, but there is a point where just discussing, the endless of like, I don't like society, just going on and on about how, oh, I wish things were better, becomes kind of counterintuitive. Where it's like, okay, like, I get it, I don't like it either. But like, the idea that you can at least set yourself up for a different situation, and you can't necessarily change society, but you can at least change how it affects you. And so I'm curious, right? We've talked about jumping into this, But do you have any advice when it comes to like the financials of getting prepared for making a purchase like this? Because, there are a lot of people who are kind of like living on the margin. And I know you said you
Yeah.
radically cut back, but do you have any
I,
advice for how to go about things like that?
Right, the first thing I have to say, most people who have listened to my stuff on YouTube are down for it, and they're kind of in, they're not earning a lot, but they're earning enough where they can put a little bit aside. Maybe it'll be for a holiday, or maybe it'll be, just a little bit of savings. And they haven't got a problem with what I'm saying. The people that have are those people that would love to do this, but are right up to the limit. So they earn £300 a week, and their outgoings are 305. And they are borrowing off of one hand to pay the other one on a weekly basis. And and they write to me and they say, look, there's no way. I just cannot do it. And I've got to be honest with them, and it's hard sometimes, because I've got to say, look, if you're in that position, if you're 25 years old and there is no way forward, you need to change what you're doing now. I'm sorry, right? But you've got to get a different job. You may need to retrain in something else, because forget buying land. Right? In 5 years' time, you're going to be exactly where you are now, or maybe going backwards. So for those people that are listening who are right on it, I've been there. I've been broke. I had to change what I was doing. I had to find another way. So I get that. But for those people who have got a little bit of money, yes, you need to tighten your belt. I was quite used to going out to have something to eat 2 or 3 times a week. And I wasn't rich by any means, but I was earning and my wife was earning as well. So with 2 incomes, we managed to pay the bills, and we had a little bit of money left over. And we used to go on holiday, and we'd probably have a weekend away every month. And if we didn't stay over, then we had, a nice weekend away, took the kids down to the coast or whatever. We stopped all of that. We didn't buy new clothes. We didn't buy a takeaway. We didn't buy anything that we didn't need. We didn't buy posh food. Everything went down to like the supermarket's own brand. And everything I earned went in a bag at the end of my bed. Right? Every pound we had left over at the end of the week went into that bag. And at the end of a year, when we actually found the plot we wanted to buy, I was still £5,000 short of the asking price. So I borrowed £5,000 off of my wife's father and spent the next year paying that back. So again, no holiday, no building for the first year, no nothing apart from pay that money back. I paid that back in the first year we owned the land, and then we just started building. And it's, well, how do you get extra money? I took on extra work. I worked longer hours. Somebody wanted something doing at a weekend, I'd work a weekend. And do you want to do that? Well, I had to do that because I needed more money, because I needed to buy the timber, and I'd already ordered the windows for the place, and they were going to cost me £1,000. So I had to get that £1,000. How do you get it? You do what you need to do to get the money, and then you build it. But the most important thing is the mental decision. Make the decision to do it, and then just do it. The problem is most people can't make that decision. They'll talk about it until the cows come home, and they won't make that step.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Again, I appreciate your time, man. So if people want, more of your opinion, where can they find you?
I'm on YouTube. If you type in the Woodlander, you'll probably see a little picture of a bald bloke. Click on that one. That'll be me. You can check out the videos. There's about 150. If you go back to the beginning, it'll tell you how I did it. There's a walkthrough. You can have a look at the land and what I've got here, the birds, and the cabin is on one of them. A lot of it is me talking about the system and what's gone wrong and what we can do collectively and individually to walk away from that system and build something better.
Well, great. Those will all be linked in the description for you guys at home. As far as my stuff, you guys know where to find me. Obviously, this show is available on YouTube. It is also available as an audio-only show on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you would like to support the show, there are obviously links. And the perk you get for supporting the show is that you get access to my pre-recorded shows early. So there's a little bit of delay in production between, when a show is recorded and when it's live on all those platforms. And basically you get access to the unedited, uncut versions of shows. If that sounds like something you'd appreciate, I'd really be thankful for it. And anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming out. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.